I'll start meanwhile, and I'll start with a thank you. I feel very honored to be here. I understand that this is the most ancient art school in China, and is 90 years old since 1 year. I did my homework before coming here and understanding, and I think it's a fantastic setup. You're all very lucky to be here, and I feel very lucky myself. The topic I'm talking about has many names today. Some people call it blockchain. That's a buzzword that the industry has picked up. I like to call it crypto because it refers mostly into advancements in the fields of cryptography. And some people, especially engineers, call it distributed ledger technology. I will present you this topic from the point of view of my research, which is not only technical, although I come from an organization that is deeply rooted into development practices. Dynorg, that's the name of a foundation. We are based in the internet. We are based in a community. We are part of a community that exists since '94. This was even before the internet. We used to run BBS, and among us are many ham radio amateurs. And basically, I am the second generation. Let's say I used to run a BBS. I'm here with two colleagues of mine, and well, the main inspiration that we have in our work, the three pillars of this foundation are mostly environmental sustainability, interdisciplinary methodologies, and free and open source software. So we operate as a non-profit, and since 2012, we work also as a research organization for the European Commission. Of course, we couldn't miss what happened in the last years. Being so much based on the internet, we actually were part also of this sort of revolution, be it funny, be it serious. I wouldn't advise anyone to invest any money into this, but my invitation is into looking into the historical and social perspective of the phenomenon that is mostly known as Bitcoin, which is nowadays the biggest blockchain that runs around the world. Also the most attacked ones, the one that offers most incentive to attack. So our question in studying this phenomenon was first and foremost, what is behind the hype? What is really the value, and why there is this sort of snowball? So many people that like to understand, to buy it, that want this technology, that want to really own it or modify it. And I believe that, and I'm not alone in believing that the origin of this technology has mostly to be traced into another phenomenon that occurred during the same years, that is also very dear to the hacker tribes we belong to. And the phenomenon is WikiLeaks. Not everyone makes this correlation, but if you look into the graph of adoption of Bitcoin, actually you find out that in January 2011, another thing occurred. WikiLeaks had its pipes for donations. The financial cables that actually brought donations to WikiLeaks were cut off. Visa and MasterCard decided to cut the funding to WikiLeaks without even a judge mandate. The main reason they did was that prominent politicians in the US, mostly from the Republican Party, said that this project was treason, was a criminal project. So Visa and MasterCard decided to cut off the pipes, even without a court process. This is, I believe, a very important aspect to understand the times in which we live, because it talks to us about network neutrality. The people that are acting in such projects, they are, yes, perhaps fighting the status quo, but on the basis that they can use an infrastructure that is neutral to them and to others. So the hackers that were behind this, we can see them perhaps in pictures together. They really bring on an ethos that actually we can change the world if we are given the means for a due process, for a neutral sort of environment where to act. And this, I think, is the historical fact that can relate this story also to our reality. I will explain why. Nowadays, we also rely on neutral networks, or at least on the declared neutrality of the networks. We are witnessing the birth of so-called shared economies. Shared economies with companies like Uber or Airbnb, they are basically extracting the relational value of our data into capitals that they are accumulating. So they are not only making money, in most places they are operating, they are also evading taxes, and they are also accumulating all the data that they collect. This is also the case in the IoT scenario, in which we have a very intense presence of sensors. This is very evident also here in Hangzhou. And in most cases, this data is actually accumulated without us knowing exactly what it is used for. So in a way, we are networks that start constituting our infrastructure. And the value of this infrastructure and the value of the awareness that we need to have about this infrastructure was very well explained by the lecturers before me, I believe. There is one more element about networks when they form that we hackers know very well about. One element that is traceable also in the deployment of email infrastructure, for instance, with the SMTP protocol, Simple Mail Transport Protocol, which is nowadays one of the most important neutral infrastructures that we use for our communication. And this element has a very common name. It's called spam. Spam is what we can also relate to quality of signal. When we create an open system, the first thing we deal with is with the overwhelming presence of noise. And this noise will actually make it very difficult to keep the system open. If we go back and look at the example of mail servers, we see that nowadays our emails are processed by very few organizations. The protocol was studied to be actually run at your home. It was studied to be decentralized so that you could be sovereign with respect to your communication. Yet, because of spam, actually nowadays we have very few corporations that are running the majority of the email communication that we have today. So a system that was designed to be distributed did not develop as a distributed system. Something went wrong. And I think that's where we try to look for solutions. I invite you to think both in local sense and in global sense now, because I believe that the solutions are to be found in the local sphere. And we must also think in an historical perspective to the actual global context. So the main question that I like to pose to us all is how can we perceive and affect all the values that travel across the networks that we are part of. And just before I explain, I'm not just talking about communication, I'm talking about our desires and needs. They are put in touch through the sharing economies, but we have not a clear awareness and control on what this data is doing. Of course, we live in a pretty and chaotic society. I think chaos has a lot of fascination, and we are working with many initiatives, be them open source, be them not really technologically based, to solve these problems. And that's where my organization and many others come in. This is a picture, for instance, of a conference of hackers, and I'm sure you have seen many. It looks more and more colorful, just like an art conference. And this is also an indicator that we need something more creative than just technology to find a solution. So I propose two main paths to look for a solution. One, of course, is technological. We practice it. As hackers, we have a lot of hackathons, conventions, the Chaos Computer Club, and all these happenings. You can find online a lot of materials about this, and they are pretty accessible. So an approach when working with technology that I believe is important is interoperability. And we have realized this with the DAOs project, which is one of the projects that we will present in the workshop that we will do on the day, on the third day of this event. We look at a product with DAOs that we are developing, an open source product, so you can appropriate, you can change it, you can redistribute it, and we engineered it to interact with a lot of existing other products. It's a design pattern. When you design something that you want to be actually part of an infrastructure, you should not look at it as using it up all, but interacting with what is already there. Interoperability is a very sustainable pattern when developing some technology. So here we go back to the good old Unix way. Unix systems, when developing Unix systems, we always say one thing, do one thing and do it well. Another important approach, another important posture when developing technology is to support the existing infrastructure and as much as possible to be generic. So we have done this with an operating system that we are distributing. At DynOrg we are distributing now the third operating system based on GNU Linux that we do in the last 15 years, and it's Dev1. Dev1 was first forked from Debian because of some changes done in the system that lowered the compatibility with existing embedded boards. And then we went on developing Dev1 to actually be compatible with up to 30 ARM boards. The same system, the same software, you can develop to run on 30 different ARM boards, from Raspberry Pi to Cubiboard to Olimex. Sunxi boards are all supported. They are very popular here in China, and actually we benefit from the market that China opened because they run well and they are very generic themselves. So I invite you to look up this project. You will find many different downloads from many different computers. We also struggle to recycle the existing infrastructure. So for instance, you can run Dev1 also on a Chromebook. You buy a Chromebook, it's completely locked in by Google. So actually, you cannot really use it for much. You can use it only for using the Google infrastructure. Well, we made it possible so that you can flash the Chromebook and still use the computer without the Google software on. So without spyware, that's how we call Google software. But this is not all, because we strongly believe the fact that technology, good technology, is not designed starting from technology. We have to start from people, from ourselves. We have to start from a situation of trust, where trust is actually debated as a cultural artifact, as an important measure for really the infrastructure that we go to build. So you will see it also in our workshop. We start really to analyze what is trust for us. And in this work, my colleague Federico is an expert, and you will enjoy if you join the workshop. And in studying trust, going back to blockchain, we actually pose ourselves one big important question when studying Bitcoin. If you know Bitcoin, you know that inside the algorithm of Bitcoin there is a thing called proof of work. This proof of work is basically just the proof that you have run your computer and consumed electricity to find some numbers. So we found this pretty unsustainable and also pretty exclusive. It is the domain of machines to demonstrate if you have worked. We believe this is not really an ideal situation. So we started tinkering around the idea of a social proof of work. How can we actually build systems that are still cryptographically strong, but they are actually governed by people? Why? Because, as we outlined, for instance, in this project about algorithmic sovereignty, we are facing many dangers in the moment in which we let machines design our system of incentives. the popular case of Pokemon Go was very evident. This system actually created incentives for young people to cross railways, to cross places that were actually dangerous to them. And with their nose into the computers, they actually created also a congestion in many cases. And imagine in a science fiction scenario, we could have game companies building games that have incentives that actually harm the whole country, creating real problems in crowd control. We went on in designing systems that put people at the center of the equation, and one of the projects that we run with the European Commission is called CommonFair. I invite you to see the website, commonfair.net. We are gathering many stories from grassroots collectives of people that try to actually govern the commons in a way that is inclusive, in an assembly, and in a way that really honors the importance that common values have for us. So we went developing a thing that we call social wallet. It is a wallet for credits, for system of credits that can be also ephemeral, that you can create and then destroy. And it's a way for collectives and for cooperatives as well to understand how values travel between themselves. I could go on with more complex explanations, but here we have our colleague Aspasia, who will actually lead this part of the workshop on the third day and will explain the many potentiality of the social wallet. In brief, it's a toolkit to build remuneration systems with online and offline transactions that can use multiple blockchain backends. We wanted to use multiple blockchain backends because we want the participants in this software to be able to choose which blockchain they want to use. For instance, in China, you may want to start a blockchain that is Chinese, and you may want to use that instead of submitting to the governance of another infrastructure. So further, groups should have more and more sovereignty about, and populations, about what they are using. So this is a little bit our recipe to find a human way to build the infrastructure of our city. And we use the metaphor of dowsing, which is this act of looking for water, just like looking for network, when we develop our router for internet, local area network awareness. And this is a conscious move. We wanted to remove from networking language the presence of military jargon. Nowadays, if you deal with internet appliances, often you hear the words defense, shield, watchdog, firewall. We think that to decolonialize this space from a military jargon is very important, because if we build the cities and also if we build our own safety, we have also to include civil society in this process. Because no one better than civil society can actually envision what is peace. And in doing that, we try to change really the terminology of the very internet applications that we are developing. So there you go with dowsing, trying to find a way to humanity in our infrastructure. Thank you.